All right, thank you everyone for being here today. My name is Rachel Becker, and I am a co-chair of CCC OER's Research and Impact Committee. And I'm from Madison Area Technical College in Madison, Wisconsin. And I'm happy to welcome Annika and Lindsay here today for their presentation, Change is Hard, Exploring Change Management Strategies for Course Marking. So I look forward to the presentation, and I understand there'll be some time at the end for questions. Great, take it away.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Hi, everyone. My name is Annika Manny, and I am representing the Midwestern Higher Education Compact today, informally known as MEC, where I serve as their OER consultant. And I am joined by Lindsay Gavush, who's the Assistant Dean of Library at the Community College of Rhode Island, and also the OER Fellow for the New England Board of Higher Education, informally known as NEBI. And we represent two of the four regional compacts. And the four compacts are working together on our collaboration in open education, and that is called our National Consortium for Open Educational Resources, or informally NCOER. So today we're going to start by sharing just a little, excuse me, about what NCOER is and the work that we've been doing in collaboration with each other. And then we're going to share some resources produced by MEC in collaboration with NCOER. One important one called the Course Mapping Roadmap. And then we'll be connecting that into the concept of change management and how approaching course marking as a change management strategy can help make the process more successful. So what is a regional compact? For more than half a century, most states have been collaborating with other nearby states through interstate higher education compacts. And while many people within the American higher education field may not be familiar with these collaborative activities, the four regional compacts, MEC in the Midwest, NEBI in the New England region, SREB of the Southern Regional Education Board in the South, and WICHE, the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education in the West, have helped states and the public and private institutions in their states to work cooperatively to expand access and excellence within their regions. Our regional compacts provide a range of programs and services, including student exchange programs that provide lower cost access to programs in one state or another, collective purchasing initiatives for things like computer hardware and software, institutional property liability insurance, and student health plans, as well as policy analysis and research, which is some of the work that we'll be talking about today, including comparative economic and demographic analyses. Compacts have worked together forever. This is just one additional collaboration in this specific area that we're all committed to. So several years ago, the four compacts went to the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation with a proposal to collaborate together specifically on open education. Again, calling our collaboration the National Consortia for Open Educational Resources, or NCOER. Our collective goal is to scale the use of high-quality OER and to enable research, develop sustainable solutions, create infrastructure, and increase collaboration among the broader open education community and across the US and beyond. We work together to elevate the best policies and practices for culture change in post-secondary institutions and systems that advance open education. We are going to put a link in the chat to our website so you can read and learn more about NCOER. So a lot of this work that we've been doing started in 2022. In that year, we put out a report called Towards Convergence, Creating Clarity to Drive More Consistency and Understanding the Benefits and Costs of OER. And Lindsay's going to put that link in the chat for that paper. This paper introduced a set of principles and frameworks that provided guidance for states, systems, and institutions who wanted to better understand the benefits of OER. From there, we led a national effort to produce the report, and that report detailed recommendations for consistently estimating the cost savings realized by students when a course uses OER compared to traditional course material. However, when we put that whole project and report together, we realized a lot of folks' ability to be able to estimate or do good estimates of how much cost savings there were is really not possible unless you have accurate data on your course materials, as in which courses are using open license materials. So from this From this activity, we led a national effort to create a new report to guide institutions and systems in developing a process for marking open and affordable courses. We convened a course marking working group, which was included a nationally representative group of institutions, state, and system experts in course marking, some people who might be here with us today, I hope. And that group identified and described 5 steps critical to the development of a course marking process. And that was all published in 2024 under the title, A Course Marking Roadmap, Recommendations to Guide the Development and Implementation of Open and Affordable Course Marking for the Benefit of Students, Faculty, and Institutions. And Lindsay's also going to put a link to that paper in the chat. If you dive into this report, it's written as if sort of course marking is a linear process, and it also assumes you're starting from zero. But you might actually find yourself anywhere in the process, and you can use the report sections that are most relevant to your needs. Also, the entire process is iterative. So as you embark or as you continue on your course marking journey, you may find yourself moving back and forth across the roadmap as needed. So I'm now going to just give a really quick introduction to the key steps that are outlined in that report, which we'll use as sort of a grounding in terms of what we're talking about when we're talking about course marking. And then we'll move into considering where each of us is on the roadmap and how the implementation of something like course marking is actually truly change management. So step 1 in the course marking process is to define your goal and purpose for marking courses. This goal may be to respond to state or system requirements to share information about the cost of course materials for students. Goals might be focused on increasing student access and success with an emphasis on equity and/or on saving money. An institution or a system might have an initiative focused on the development of OER, and they need to assess the impact of that work. So whatever the goal or purpose is for developing or implementing a course marking process, it's important always at the beginning to articulate that goal so that everyone get on the same page. On our second step, it's creating a committee. So we truly believe that course marking is something that touches so many different parts of the institution. So we outlined in here who some of those potential members might be, and our group really brainstormed who should be involved and, what would happen if so-and-so wasn't involved. And that's sometimes we'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of getting everybody on board. So we of course recommend having some sort of leader or champion for course marking, sort of serving as a group leading this work, responsible for making sure that it happens. You would need registrar and registration system expertise, certainly full and part-time and adjunct faculty decision makers, library representatives who are familiar with OER, course materials, licensing, people in the scheduling office who assign courses and fees, people in IT and ed tech who manage your student information system or your learning management system or other technologies. Folks in institutional research or analytics who might be taking some of the data that is generated through course marking and using those data to make statements about the impact of open educational resources on your student outcomes. Students, they're the folks that are going to use the information that you put into the system to make decisions, so they should be involved in how that rolls out. And then potentially instructional designers, campus stores, centers for teaching and learning, enrollment management folks, and of course, leadership. We want to make sure we have buy-in across the entire institution. So once the goals and purpose for course marking have been defined, step 3 is really to dig in on your identification and development of terms and definitions for course marking. And it's really important to take this step to make sure that everyone that's involved in the process is using the same language and making sure that that language is both defined and documented. So some of the decisions that might need to be made are, what exactly are we marking? Are we marking open educational resources, and that's based on the license? Are we marking affordable courses, and that's based on some dollar amount that we're going to agree to is this dollar and below is, quote, affordable? Are we going to use the term like low textbook costs, zero textbook costs? There's lots of stuff out there. So really taking the time to dig into this and figuring out how exactly you're going to define what you're marking and communicate that will be really important. The next step in here is to develop and document your process. So This may be based on the work that you've already done in the previous sections. And determination of whether your course marking initiative is a policy or a process, it might depend on, where it's coming from. So is this a system level decision that's coming down to the institution saying you need to do this, or a state level decision? Is it something that's, ground up, your particular institution wants to do this for whatever reason? It just depends on where it's coming from. It's also dependent on whether there is sort of a formal process for policy or development at your institution. There may be, whenever a new policy is developed, there may be specific governance involved. Any new policy has to involve X, Y, and Z stakeholders at our campus, things like that. So this is where you might sort of start to get into the nitty-gritty about what, where does it start? Where does it go? Who touches it? And how are we going to make sure that that stays consistent and accurate throughout the whole process? And then the last step is sort of implementing and then actually communicating this policy. So a lot of folks that I've talked to anecdotally spent lots and lots of time thinking really hard about their terms and their definitions and their process. And then they put it into place, and then they forgot to tell students that they were doing it. So students go to register, they have no idea these new markers are there. They don't know, or they don't know what they mean, or they don't know how to use them to search for the courses that they want to take. That can be a problem. So this final stage and part of your implementation is not just to stand up sort of the technologies and everything, but to really hone in on your communication plans to ensure that that is smooth. And then, of course, it's not documented here, but any time after you implement something new, you want to assess and improve that. You're going to be measuring your success in multiple ways, depending on what the goal was for doing this in the first place. But this is always an opportunity, so that even if you already have course marking in place, for example, at your institution, they can always be probably improved, and it's always worth a second look. So I'm going to pause here really quick and just see if there's anything in the chat. It looks like lots of introductions. Great to see everyone. I would love for everyone just to think to themselves, like, where are you on this roadmap? Are you new to this? Are you sort of somewhere in the middle? Are you in one of those iterative cycles, like we put it into place, but it's not working as well as we hoped it would? So we're trying to iterate. I'd love to see some of that in the chat if you want to share. Okay, so we said this presentation was going to be about change management. So what the heck does this have to do with change management? So in many cases, the institution's resources are focused solely on the project itself, as in making sure you have a thing you have to do, you're going to get it done, and then we're going to measure it, maybe. But that means often that little attention is paid to stakeholder commitment, and then that meaning the need to bring influential people as well as individuals who are going to be impacted by this change on the journey with you. So the primary goal of stakeholder commitment, or change management, as we refer to it in consultant speak, is really to facilitate and sustain the enthusiastic acceptance and adoption of new strategies, technologies, or processes. But far too often, that's like the last thing we think about. And unfortunately, that can often result in sort of suboptimal outcomes. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pivot, and after this sort of high level framing of a roadmap to course marking, and we're going to unpack a few of these principles that are on the screen here and consider how they might apply to course marking to make that process much more successful. This framework that you see on the screen here is based off of a publication by Deloitte Consulting that we're using. And I believe Lindsay put the link to that full paper in the chat to give you sort of more context about effective change management.
All right, so I'm going to jump in now. Thank you, Annika, for getting us kicked off. It's really nice to be here today with everyone. Very excited to chat about this. And I think a lot of what I'm going to walk us through over the next few slides might feel familiar, like maybe Annika just mentioned it in the previous slides, but putting all of what she shared into this organized framework can be really helpful to move this work forward. So just bear with me and we'll hope that it all makes sense at the end. And I think we should have plenty of time, hopefully, to discuss what's going on at your institutions, what are the challenges that you're coming up against. So I'm actually really excited for that part. Okay, so I'm going to walk us through each of the steps of the framework, starting with this one. So start with the end in mind and understand the institution's culture. Annika mentioned this quite a few times, but it's really important that we set a clear goal that multiple stakeholders can get behind. I saw just a moment ago in the chat that someone said one of the biggest challenges was keeping their stakeholders engaged. So we know that's an issue that we all need to work on. And some of the ways that we can do that is to align our course marking efforts and initiatives with system or institutional values. Knowing exactly what your leadership wants to achieve and having a very clear vision of how much better things will be if the contemplated initiative is successful is really key to effective alignment and core project communications. So, in order to inspire this kind of change, there really needs to be a clear goal that everyone can get behind. That includes our students, our academic leadership, maybe enrollment management, like all of our stakeholders. Annika rattled off a very large list before, so I'm not going to go through all of that again. But the main point is that we need to align our goal with, the institution, the direction the institution is already heading in. And in today's environment, institutions have to have very clear and specific strategic directions, because higher ed is kind of at that, pinnacle of we're all struggling in different ways to get students, to keep students. And so we can't just sit back anymore. We have to have very clear goals that everyone at the institution is behind. And any undertaking that doesn't align with, act upon, or uphold these values and key initiatives will likely encounter resistance in the forms of funding, human resources, and prioritization. Okay. And the last bullet point I put on the slide itself is patience is sometimes necessary. I'm going to get to that in a few slides, but course marking, sometimes it can feel like you have worked, on your open education initiatives for so long, and you really feel like you are at the point where course marking makes sense and it's a time to move the initiative forward. But the administration or the partners that you need to work with might not feel that way, or they may not be at a place where that's something they can work on. So waiting for the right time to bring things forward, waiting for those opportunities can be really difficult when you've put in so much effort and you really just want to kind of close that loop for your students to say, hey, we're doing all of this great work on the ground. This is how you can find courses that are doing this work. It's so easy. It's right when you register. We all want that for our students, but sometimes we have to be patient to just bite when the time is right. So I'll get to that in a few minutes. Annika, could you move to the next slide, please? This one is huge, and I think we all understand the value behind communication. Annika expressed earlier that, the importance again of those cross-institutional teams will help move this change forward. And it's very likely that the same information is going to be needed to be communicated in various different ways. You'll have lots of different audiences that you need to approach and communicate with through numerous channels and with substantial opportunities for multi-directional dialogue. That will be necessary to create, that critical mass of knowledge needed to make the message matter. So whether that's communicating to senior leadership, why is this a value to invest in? Why do we want to do this for our students? Why is now the right time? That's going to probably look different for everyone, depending on your institution system, situation, what's going on, what are you prioritizing? Why is course marking going to be, a priority for you to take on? And when we're talking about audience communication, Annika mentioned earlier, like sometimes we do all of this backbreaking work for our students, and then we don't actually communicate it or communicate it clearly enough that they understand what we've done for them. And I worked with a few institutions over the last few years with my work at NEBI, and that happened. These four institutions did really, really wonderful work, and we surveyed the students to get a better understanding of what they valued in course marking. And we actually had to pivot our study because there was not enough awareness of course marking itself to measure that. So we were very shocked to learn that like 74% of the students we surveyed did not even know that their institution had course marking, which, you know, again, it's an opportunity to revisit and say, okay, we need to be better at communicating to our students. We did a really great job at that cross-institutional team. We all communicated, we got course marking up and running, but we didn't actually do a great job for our students. So again, communication is key. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Okay, next slide, Annika. Okay, this one's really important. Walk a mile in the shoes of those whose roles will change. So we all know that it's going to take the entire community essentially to get course marking up and running. Annika, again, explained all of the different departments that are involved, and it's a lot. So it's really important to take a step back and to understand every step of the employee's change journey and how it could affect his or her day-to-day work. And so, yeah, it might be great that you spoke with, you know, a VP and they said, of course, I'll get my people to work on this. I'm behind this. I value this. This is great for our students. And those employees may also value it, but their day-to-day is going to change. What is that going to look like? So we need to really understand, you know, help them understand, like, we share so much data with like our senior leadership to help them get behind our initiatives. But we should also be sharing that data with the folks who are doing the legwork to move this forward. So, you know, whether that's the admin assistants, the deans, the department chairs who are actually doing that data collection of their faculty and handing it over to whomever, and then it gets into the hands of the registrars. There's a lot of legwork that happens. And so if we can share with those people the data and the outcomes, or even just, you know, we spend a lot of time talking about, you know, certain studies in open education and the value for our students and the barriers that our students face. That's really important to share that information with the frontline staff as well. And I admittedly have not done that yet. And so that's something that I've added on my list at my new institution to do. Also, it's really important to give students a voice and a role. So whether that looks like, you know, involving them in, if you are embarking on a low cost marker, involving them in determining what does that low cost marker look like? What is that cost threshold? What do they truly deem affordable? And that might mean they go back to the student body, whether that's through student government or another means, and having a discussion with their peers. And it's not us making that decision for them. And I just wanted to share a really quick example. So I'm fairly new at the Community College of Rhode Island. I've been here a little bit over a year, and we are just starting to get course marking up and running. Just met with our registrar about 2 weeks ago and had to kind of give her a 101 of what is OER, why are we doing this? And after I explained, you know, a really quick and dirty overview, and I gave her a one-pager with some studies, she just looked at me and said, why haven't we been why isn't everyone doing this? Like, she was like really floored and really excited to help in this. And she sat back and said, okay, I see that you want to mark things at the section level and not the course level. So I'm going to have to go back to my drawing board and kind of rethink things, but I'm going to figure this out because this is really important. And so just sharing that with her, like I said, I hadn't done that before. And after Annika and I looked at this change management strategy, I was like, this is something I need to do. And it made a difference. And yes, she was very upfront with me and said, yeah, this is going to be a little bit more legwork for me, but I see the value and absolutely, like, we should do this work. So just a little tidbit. Okay, Annika, I think we're good for the next one. Thank you. Okay, create win-wins and align incentives. So it's really important that we're doing all this work. Sometimes it's nice to step back and just celebrate and recognize our hard work and achievements because they don't come often. Or maybe they do and we just don't celebrate them. And we should be doing that more because we're doing a lot of really good stuff. And I love seeing in social media and in the listservs people sharing those achievements and those celebrations because it makes me stop and say, wow, I don't do that enough. And I always really like to point out, Annika, would you mind sharing the link to the Pacific, University of the Pacific? I don't know if anyone knows Michelle Gibney and her team there, but they do excellent work. They're a smaller institution, but they celebrate their wins, and I love that for them. And I always get really envious. But Michelle and her team threw like a really big party a few years ago to celebrate a certain threshold of cost savings, and they made a huge deal out of it. And they had a cake, and they had the provost come and speak, and the press was there, and they made a big deal out of it, and they should have. So I loved that example, and I think we should, as a community, be doing more of that for ourselves, and for our students. So celebrate those win-wins, and to align incentives, something that I thought about like that could fit in here was maybe could we potentially encourage flexible work environments for some of this work associated with course marking? A lot of it, like a lot of the nitty-gritty part of this work is data entry and picking up the phone to call faculty and confirm that they're still using a resource, or trying to really assess, are you using something that's open, or like are we talking the same language? Like, what are you using? Can I take a look at it? That takes, a bit of legwork. And could staff maybe be incentivized to get an extra work from home day if that's something that appeals to them? Is that something that we could offer them? Can we be creative in, developing those incentives to get this work moving forward? And I understand like the bureaucracy of, I very much now understand as a state employee, the bureaucracy that sometimes is involved, but sometimes we do have flexibility. So maybe just exploring at your own institution, what could that look like, to make this work a little more enjoyable, if you will. Okay, Annika, you can go to the next one. I really like this one. Embrace relentless incrementalism to help achieve radical change. So, starting with a bold goal in mind and taking small steps relentlessly, so small steps, but relentlessly, can build organizational capital. So, course marking really is such an iterative process, and it can take lots of different iterations to get it right. But it can also take just a long time to even feel like it's the right time to push the initiative forward, which I talked about a few moments ago. And that's okay, right? So timing really can be everything. And, on a dime, your institution might shift gears because of something. Maybe it's something coming from, the federal administration. Lots of things are coming at us every single day that can be a little overwhelming, but sometimes there's opportunity in those changes as well. So take the temperature of your, what's going on, and figuring out when is that timing, right? I'll give you another example. At my current institution, I told you we just started course marking a few weeks ago. And we just started because, I've been here almost a year and I hadn't said a word. I was like, not the right time. Lots of things going on, lots of different priorities, and it just wasn't the right time. So I didn't even open my mouth. And I was in a meeting with two VPs, and OER came up, and they wanted to create some kind of different strategy at one of our campuses, that we were trying to increase enrollment and just trying something different. And I said, well, could we consider maybe funding some faculty grants for OER adoption at this campus? Like, wouldn't it be so cool if this campus was the campus that you didn't have to pay for your textbooks? And they were really excited about that. And to even get them to be excited and to be thinking about giving me money, I was like, whoa, that's huge. And then one of them, who's the VP of enrollment management, just said, oh yeah, and then we could just mark the courses in Banner, and then the students would know. And I was like, yes, we could do that. I can help you do that. And so he connected me with a registrar, but it just was like happenstance, and the timing was right. And, sometimes things happen that way. So I know that doesn't happen all the time. It was the first time anything like that has ever happened to me. But the main point of this one is to just really kind of be in the moment, always push forward to, achieve that radical change, but also to know your audience, take the temperature, and know when the time is right to strike. Okay, Annika, next one. All right, this is our second to last one. You won't get what you don't measure. So Annika talked about this a little bit, about making sure that we're collecting data and engaging with folks in institutional research, or whomever that may be at your institution or system, to explore what can we measure. Once we have course marking in place, we can do a lot, and we can do a lot to support our open education initiatives. And a lot of times, we know kind of anecdotally that students really like this. They love OER. They love when faculty employ open pedagogical practices, but it's really hard to measure and to capture that in ways that the administration values, because they're used to pulling reports and looking at numbers and data. And so if we can maybe set some goals to measure different student success outcomes, we have a better chance of connecting with our administrators and getting more funding for our initiatives. So some things we might want to look at: cost savings, which we all know, DFW rates. Here at my college, gateway course passing rates is a really big one that we're working on. Obviously, this will look different at every institution, but it's really important to set some goals, at least, to measure the impact that, all of the investment that you're putting into this work. Okay, and next one. So I know we said there was only 7, but I added a new one because it's really important. So unexpected changes have a plan. So in this session's description, we mentioned a lot of different factors, like last minute faculty assignment changes. And hold on, I don't have the description in front of me, but we had a few. Anyone else remember other ones that we wrote down? I don't know. But anyway, this was one of the really big ones that we wanted to kind of put to discussion. And after the slide, we will have an open discussion. But yeah, so what happens when maybe faculty don't mark the courses? There are last minute assignment changes. How do we navigate and negotiate? Like, a student signed up with the expectation, because there was a marker saying, I won't be paying for textbook costs, and then they show up to class, there's a different faculty member, and there's $100 textbook cost expectation. Like, what do we do in those situations where we can't necessarily strip the academic freedom of that faculty member to say, no, you can't use this textbook, but we also have to value and respect the expectation of the student who signed up for that course. So one way that I thought was really certainly does not solve every problem, but we worked with New England College, which is in New Hampshire, um, a few years ago, and we're in fact actually still working with them on a new project. The registrar there, Alex Latner, is really wonderful and knew nothing about OER before we started working with them, and really kind of dove in, very similar to my registrar here, got behind the value, saw, why this was important work. And so she's been working really hard to kind of work on things like this. So um, I'm going to ask Annika to play this really quick video clip. I think it's like 58 seconds long. And hopefully we can get the audio to work.
Yeah, Lindsay, I'm not sure that I remember to click the share audio, so I'm going to try it and then I might have to stop share and reshare. So just bear with me a second.
This is a screenshot I took of our reporting database connected to Banner called Argos. One challenge a small institution will have is managing instructor changes made to sections while remembering to check if there is a course mark on that section. I've attempted to solve this using a regularly scheduled instructor assignment table in Banner for sections with a course mark. This activity will occur when an instructor change is made and will trigger an automatic report to be emailed to us to review. We then confirm if there's any change to the textbook by sending it to the dean and instructor. I have a handout with the sequel and some other information about our process for this. While it may not be possible for institutions to replicate it exactly, I hope it gives you some ideas about how to build your own change management process and leverage reporting in ways that support your work.
Thanks, Annika. And we do have in our folder that we're going to share at the end with resources, I do have a PDF of that handout with the sequel listing that you can hand off to your registrar. Even if you don't use Banner, I'm sure just kind of they can figure out something in a system that you work with. Okay, so let's see. So what do we do when we have unexpected or last minute expected changes in faculty assignments? We can talk to department chairs or whomever makes assignments. If certain classes are known to have last minute assignment changes, maybe encourage them to consider playing it safe and not marking the course, even if it is likely that an OER or a no cost or low cost, however you are using course marking, will be used. Make the no cost for a textbook surprise a pleasant one and not vice versa. And then we do know it's very common, unexpected faculty changes will happen. So it's better to talk about this uncomfortable reality ahead of time and to work with various stakeholders to problem solve and to at least be proactive about the situation as opposed to reactive. So whether you're employing some kind of reporting system like Alex just showed us on the video clip or something else, being proactive is really important. Maybe I've talked to folks before who have created some kind of emergency fund for when this does unfortunately happen. We can support students to purchase unexpected materials. So maybe talking to the provost's office to see if you can work to create some kind of emergency fund. Student governments often have funding and they're often looking for ways to support student-centered initiatives. I think even, connecting with your development office or alumni fundraising, which can be a unique approach to create some kind of fund. And maybe even, you expand that conversation to say, hey, in case of, instead of just being reactive and having an emergency fund, if we think of it this way, can we be proactive and create a fund to support faculty development in open educational resources or open ed? Okay, and then the other last thing I just wanted to mention, in working with schools like New England College and 3 others that I mentioned before, we were able to do a little bit of research with those students Again, I mentioned that we kind of went in looking at their awareness of course marking and how that impacted certain things, but many students weren't not actually aware of course marking. So we had to pivot our research a bit, but we did. And I'm going to put, ask Annika to put a link to the PDF for our paper there. But some of the quick findings worth noting. We worked with institutions specifically that had high Pell eligible rates of students, and some of the things we found that weren't necessarily about course marking, but were that compared to their non-Pell recipient peers, Pell Grant recipients at independent institutions, they spend more time and effort searching for ways to save money on course materials. They do experience higher levels of stress due to the cost of the learning materials, and they do prioritize the cost of materials and course selection over any other factors such as day or time of the course offering, faculty assignment, and or modality. So we're hoping to get a little bit more. We are re-engaging with those institutions again and 3 new additional ones. So we are hoping that we can get a little bit more on that awareness piece research coming in a year or so. Okay, that is all I have for that piece, Annika. Do you want to go to the next slide? Okay. So I think I mentioned like we purposefully left out some of those cliffhangers we shared in the session description, but for a good reason, because we don't have all of the answers, and we'd love to hear from everyone else on what challenges you're encountering. Is it, the ones that I mentioned, the ones in the session description, which I'm actually just going to pop back into the chat. So folks, if you're visual like me, need to see. But also, I think, we have enough time where we can entertain any sort of question. And I know there were probably lots coming into the chat, but I have not looked at all of them. So I think we can let people raise their hand, unmute, chime in.
See a lot of discussion about technology. I think you triggered some good noodling about how we can use our technology to our advantage to help with these kinds of notifications and different things. And I saw Melissa from Minnesota had a great comment in here about utilizing some of the newer features of Workday, which includes artificial intelligence agents that they can actually create. So they could create an agent that could track and report on different things to help them not have to do that manually. I thought that was really cool.
Great idea. Please share with the community if you do that. Neat. And I think I didn't mention it because it wasn't totally relevant at the time during my slides, but if you do feel like you're ready for course marking, but you are struggling to engage stakeholders, something I had success with at my last institution, which you may have heard me talk about in the past, I went directly to, after not hearing from the registrar and the provost, not because they didn't care, but just because, again, priorities pulled in a million different directions. I went directly to our student government and said, hey, the library's been working on, with faculty on open educational resources, and we would love to have this integrated into Banner so that you all can see when you're registering where these courses are. And they immediately drafted a resolution and sent it to the provost's office. And within a week, the registrar emailed me and said, okay, let's do this. When are we meeting? And so students have a lot of power and sway. So sometimes just really working with them from the get-go is usually the smarter idea. I wish I had started there.
We have a question from Joshua in Tennessee. He's asking if we've seen consistency in the curriculum committee role, so to request marking information in the formal proposals for courses.
I haven't seen consistency in that, Joshua, but I have heard that a lot recently, and it's something that I think is a really smart move, because we're collecting information there anyway. Like, that's a great place to add that into any kind of CRC form. Clint, I see your hand is up.
Hi, Lindsay. Hi, Annika. Thank you. As you know, BC Campus is kind of similar to the compacts in that we do a lot of regional work here in British Columbia. So we have multiple institutions. And I'm just wondering, in your roles with the compacts, have you begun sort of aggregating any of the data from multiple institutions and doing kind of reporting on a systemic level with any of the compacts that you work with? And if so, like, what are the challenges that you would have with doing that kind of work?
Lindsay, do you want to mention Witchy's work, or do you want me to?
You can mention it.
Sure. So Witchy, Western Compact, has been working over the last couple of years on a time to completion report. And that's aggregating data from lots of different institutions and looking at the impact of course marking on students' time to completion. They published an article just a little while ago, like maybe 6 months ago, about their initial results, and they're actually rerunning some of the same analyses with a larger data set. And they've also shared their methodology and like how they organize their spreadsheets and different things for the data to run the analysis that they did. Lindsay found it. Thank you. You get faster than me. I'll talk, you find. Which is really helpful, I think, for the field so that we can replicate this kind of work and also with different institutions in different regions as well. So that's really great. And then I asked Amy Hofer in the chat just a few minutes ago, a little bit up from the bottom of the chat, to share some of the great research that she's done in Open Oregon. They recently published a paper, Students Vote with Their Feet for Lower Cost Courses, and on measuring sort of the outcomes of what they found when students with student behavior around course marking. So once students had access to course marking, did that change their behavior? And they have some really interesting outcomes to share. So I encourage everyone to take a look at that paper as well.
Yes, and that actually, Amy and her team's work inspired our research, which we tried to do and then ran into that roadblock of, oh, the students didn't know about course marking. So yeah, just wanted to tout that paper.
Thank you.
Thanks, Clint.
I see another question from Joshua about faculty assignments. Any patterns in course releases or compensation for full-time faculty for OER development? And what is the space that you've seen for adjunct instructors in the development of OER?
Yeah, so for the first part, course releases compensation. I mean, I can only really speak to the work I'm aware of, but I have seen, like, at my old institution, we ran like a faculty fellows program where we did compensate faculty to develop OER, and we gave them the choice of, stipend and or course release, and we just worked with the provost's office to negotiate those terms. And I have seen that elsewhere. I certainly didn't come up with that on my own, so I'm sure I, talked with someone about developing that. And also in that same program, we negotiated with the provost to allow part-time or adjunct faculties to participate at the same level. Obviously not with course release, but they were able to participate, be compensated, and we were also creative in that way too. one of our adjuncts kind of did the math and said, well, I'm with taxes, the stipend is going to be, so much less for me. Would you be willing to pay for me to go to OE Global in Milan instead? Like same exact money we would be like spending from the institutional standpoint, but it would go so much further if we were purchasing that PD on her behalf, in which we were happy to do. So again, being flexible and creative in those ways.
Yeah, and I've certainly seen lots of different grant programs structured in many different ways. I think there's a lot of creativity out there. Generally it's some sort of sliding scale from like a smaller compensation or stipend for just, either reviewing OER and considering it, or just doing a straight adoption, a replacement, up to, much more significant compensation for the actual development or creation of new materials. I've also seen some really creative stuff. You might want to look at Wisconsin Technical Colleges. They're doing some really creative work through their WisTech Open program to actually do OER creation across colleges. So they're harnessing the power of faculty that teach the same subject, but at different colleges across the system to work together on like team creation teams, so that they're sort of lightening the load across the system. So it's not just one faculty member that has to write the whole thing, but rather sort of a partnership. And then the materials that are created through that collaboration are then put back out for like the entire system and well, for everybody to use because they're openly licensed. But in that way, it sort of not only lightens the load for any individual institution or faculty member, but it also sort of ensures that any of those like regionality issues that might come into play, like, this part of the state is like urban and this part of the state is very rural. When faculty members that work in those different parts of the state work together to create open materials, they can kind of provide two versions of that chapter, one that's more relevant to students in a rural context versus an urban context, for example. So I definitely encourage folks to check that out and see how they've creatively organized themselves to do that.
Yeah, I just want to go back to Clint's question and address the challenge piece that he inquired about, like regionally, looking at institutions, doing a broader examination with course marking. That's something that when Nebby kind of designed our course marking grant work, which just a really quick and dirty overview, like we are giving institutions money to implement course marking. And in that, in addition to the funding, we're also supporting them through the process. And one of our big drivers behind doing this work was to get a little bit more consistency in our region so we could do broader analysis. And so our program is called No Cost Course Marking. So we ask that any institution that works with us, they have like a broad no cost marker. So students just, see the resources free, but we also ask that on the back end, they're tagging anything that's actually OER. So it's kind of like a separate tag because we wanted to be able to do some kind of analysis, and we were finding that like different institutions were using different terms. And if they were also doing low cost, then that was all mixed in together and it was hard to parse that data. So it's still a challenge, but it's one thing that we are doing to try to like get a little bit more consistency, at least in our region. And a lot of the institutions we work with still opt to have a low cost marker as well, because that's just something that they want to do, which is fine. But we're asking that it's not all intertwined in the same, it's not like a NOLO or a ZOLO. So yeah, something we're still working on, Clint.
Well, we're just starting down this path systemically here in British Columbia to do that work too. So, so any lessons learned about, you know, the sort of regional approaches and the challenges that you've had, I would love to be able to talk to you more and have our project managers reach out to you and speak to you more
Absolutely.
about those. Yeah,
Yeah, we can set that up.
great. Thank you.
Lots of great sharing in the chat. Thank you all so much. You're such good colleagues to each other. There's some really good stuff in here. Everyone should save the chat. Take a moment and save chat. There's some really good stuff in here.
Hi, this is Kate from Massachusetts. I'm at Bunker Hill Community College, and how we go about it is we have 2 flags we can use. We have no cost OER, and we have low cost under $50. Some of our institutions cap it at $40, but most of our institutions use the $50 markers. And we do have a Massachusetts course marking guide that we try to use. And it's been very successful. I think Bob Awkward's on the call somewhere. Hopefully he's listening. And, you know, it's been fairly successful. And it's all voluntary, which is really great. I think a lot of our institutions are using the course marking system, and we try to differentiate low cost, which is under $50, and no cost or OER. And it's been working very well. We've been trying to get all of the colleges to do it voluntarily, and it's been a struggle. It's iterative processes. You all know it's been, some colleges have been taking 3 steps forward and 2 steps back sometimes. Some have been very successful in getting the program started and then going back a couple of steps because of you know, their college infrastructure. And, you know, we've been fighting the good cause and going, you know, at Bunker Hill, we have been recently got caught up in the day 1 programs that are going on right now with the campus bookstores, Barnes and Noble. And so that's been a fun ride too. And that's been interfering with our OER programs. But luckily, our administration has been really great. They want to keep on moving forward with OER at our college because they really do believe in it. So I think we are really at a good pace in the state of Massachusetts. We don't have any legislation for OER, but we do have a really fantastic OER outreach within Massachusetts, and it's all voluntary. And so it's fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. And Kate, I just linked the webinar that you participated in a few years ago for us for NEBI, because it was fantastic, and I encourage everyone to check it out.
And we just redid our course flagging guideline, and that took about 6 or 7 months to do. And if you go onto the DHE's OER website, you'll be able to see our new course flagging guidelines. So I encourage all of you to go there and look at it, because it was a lot of hard work to get to that new guideline.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you everyone for joining us today. It was really great to learn from everyone. I can't wait to look through the chat and see what I missed, because it was very lively and lots of great knowledge shared. Yeah. And thanks to CCC OER for inviting us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Annika. This session was recorded, so it will be posted on the CCC OER website. And this was, again, part of our summer conversation series that was presented by the Research and Impact Committee. So thank you, everyone, for this wonderful conversation. And I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks.